Okay, so we know, of course, in June of 1944, the British, the Americans, the Canadians landed in Normandy and created the Second Front in northern France. Hugely significant moment, Operation Overlord, known as D-Day, very famous, iconic. But thousands of miles to the east, there was another Allied offensive operation named Operation Bagration, which was just as important as Normandy. And arguably, according to some historians, was even more important than the Normandy invasion, although historians like to argue about these things. The key thing is that in June of 1944, the Nazis faced two attacks. One in France, which is well known, even the most casual historian knows about D-Day. But what Americans especially don't know is the massive attack against the Nazis in the Soviet Union, Operation Bagration, which occurred on June 22nd, which started on June 22nd, 1944. So I'm going to talk about that in this series of podcasts. I'm going to try not to bog you down in too much detail. So let me give you some of the high points of Operation Bagration and the significance of it. The most significant thing is that Operation Bagration annihilated Army Group Center. Remember Army Group Center? We really haven't talked much about Army Group Center after 1941. This was the portion of the German army that was tasked with the job of capturing Moscow, which it failed to do. There had been fighting, of course, after 1941, but most of the fighting in 1942 and 1943, as I've talked about in podcast, happened in southern Russia, along the border of Ukraine, Stalingrad, the Battle of Kursk, with Army Group South. Army Group Center takes the center stage in Bagration. And what you should know is that the Soviets shatter Army Group Center in this massive operation. The other thing, some other things about Operation Bagration, if you looking at the map I have, and you don't really have to know the detail of it, but you can see just the absolute size of Operation Bagration. It was a front that was nearly 1,000 miles long, that stretched all the way from the border of eastern Romania all the way to the Baltic state of Estonia. Just in terms of sheer size, it was geographical size. Operation Bagration overshadows what happened at Normandy. And some of the other aspects of it, the Germans had more losses inflicted at Operation Bagration in 4 weeks than it had in 5 months at Stalingrad. Operation Bagration with 2.3 million, and again, don't get too, I'm not going to test you on these details, but just to give you a sense of it, 2.3 million Soviet soldiers were involved in this huge offensive operation against Army Group Center, which was it's the biggest offensive operation, Allied offensive operation, in terms of just sheer geography, but also manpower during World War II. It demolished, as I said, the three army groups that made up our Army Group Center, and it tore open the Eastern Front and allowed the Soviets to move into Eastern Europe. Now, another aspect of Operation Bagration is that it was timed to coincide with Overlord, with the landing in France. I've talked about the Tehran conference in November of 1943, and these conferences seem kind of boring, but they're actually hugely significant because decisions were made there that played out on the battlefield. And at Tehran, as I've talked a lot about, Stalin sided with the U.S. In against Churchill about the invasion of France, but also Stalin made a promise to the Allies, to Churchill and Roosevelt, that at about the same time as Normandy, as the invasion of France, he would attack the Germans in the Soviet Union. So one of the things that you need to know is the Germans are facing a coordinated attack, both on the Western Front in Normandy and on the Eastern Front in the Soviet Union in June of 1944. It's not a coincidence that the Soviets launched Operation Bagration in June of 1944. It was part of a coordinated plan that the Allies had decided on at Tehran in early December 1943. So what is often lost in American public memory or collective memory is that the Nazis are facing not only attack from Normandy, which bogs down, actually, as I talked about on Monday, it bogs down for about 6 weeks before the breakout at Saint-Lô, but it's facing 2 weeks after, or 2 or 3 weeks after the landing of Allied soldiers in Normandy. The Nazis face even a larger attack, a larger offensive in the Soviet Union. So pretty incredible. And, students of World War II, you need to know about Operation Bagration. It is absolutely essential. It's the biggest Allied operation in World War II. It's almost completely forgotten it's almost never talked about in the context of D-Day, that there was this combined operation between the Allies in Normandy and the Soviet Army in the western part of the Soviet Union. My guess is that in the Soviet Union, D-Day is not really talked about that much. That would definitely be my guess. Nations tend to focus on the operations of their own armies. But we do need to realize as World War II historians what was going on. And we need to have a more sophisticated understanding of just what the Nazis were facing in June of 1944. It wasn't just the landing in Normandy, but it was also Operation Bagration in the Soviet Union. A couple of things about Bagration. It was personally named by Stalin. Bagration was and I'm sure I'm butchering the Russian, he was a Russian general who fought and died in the war against Napoleon. And so he was a mythic Russian national hero. And so Stalin reached back in time. So it's interesting. It has nothing to do with Bolshevism or communism. Stalin reached back in time to the defeat of Napoleon's invasion of Russia and naming this operation. Another thing to talk about in terms of Bagration is that it happened on June 22nd, 1944. And this was Stalin being Stalin because one of the reasons it launched on June 22nd, 1944 was that was the third year anniversary of the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany. So this was Stalin having a little bit of revenge in terms of symbolic revenge against the Nazi Germany. So that's kind of the intro of Bagration. Hugely important operation, a massive defeat of Hitler, perhaps his greatest single defeat in the entire war, in all of World War II. Again, combined operation. D-Day wasn't a standalone operation. This 2 weeks later, the Soviets launched an attack that had been agreed upon against the Nazis in the East. So Hitler is facing two attacks, one with the Allies in Normandy, the second with a massive Soviet attack on Army Group Center along the western border of the Soviet Union.